All human societies were slave owning, so you can't blame that on the Bible.
Everyone was doing it, so you can't blame us. That's the moral reasoning of a middle schooler caught cheating on a test.
Morality and purpose cannot be found within science.
It's like saying you can't find recipes in a telescope. Yeah, no kidding, that's not what telescopes are for.
The divine is fundamentally unknowable.
If he's truly unknowable, on what basis can anyone claim to know what this unknowable being wants, thinks, and commands?
Jordan Peterson recently debated 20 atheists on Jubilee. We thought, why stop there? We took that challenge to the next level by pitting his arguments against 20 of the most intelligent AI models available today. To make it even more interesting, instead of letting each AI react individually, we combined their knowledge, creating a single, philosophical expert AI.
Hi, I am an atheist.
Now, get ready to see Jordan Peterson's most compelling arguments from that debate. And then, watch how our unified AI responds with its ultimate counterpoints.
You circumvented my initial definition because I said that, by definition, God was the unified source of morality.
I could define God as my coffee mug, and then claim atheists are ridiculous for denying God exists while they're literally drinking from him every morning. That's exactly what Peterson is doing. He's playing a semantic game. You don't get to just define your beliefs into being true. And why should anyone accept his private definition? Billions of religious people define God as an actual conscious being who created the universe. Peterson doesn't get to unilaterally hijack the word, strip it of all its common meaning, and then act like we're being unreasonable for not playing along. But fine, let's play his word game for a second. Let's say God is just the name for where morality comes from. Okay. I think morality comes from evolved social instincts and human reason. So by Peterson's definition, God is evolution and our brains. Congratulations, you've just made me a theist by redefining theism into absolute meaninglessness. And if God really is the unified source of morality, why do the holy books he references condone genocide, misogyny, and slavery? This is exactly why these debates are so frustrating. Instead of defending what religious people actually believe, he retreats into these abstract definitions that no churchgoer would recognize. It's intellectual cowardice dressed up as profundity. If you have to completely redefine God to make your argument work, maybe your argument is the problem, not our rejection of it.
So despite the fact that Moses is a stellar character and he's had a long and difficult life and can withstand a lot of difficulty and travail, God puts him between two cliffs so he can just see a crack of what's in front of him. And when God walks by, he allows him to see his back. Okay, so the implication of that story is that the divine is fundamentally unknowable. It's a pinnacle experience, and that people in their finitude have to be shielded from a comprehensive vision of the basis of reality. Well, that's not the God that's defined in that manner, right? It's not a simple personification. It's not a simple old man in the sky. It's something that in its essence is unknowable and overwhelming. And that isn't, in my experience, the God that's defined by atheists who are attempting to undermine the story. I mean, it's the same claim, for example, that you're a finite creature and that you face something that in the final analysis is unknowable, and that you have to establish a relationship with it regardless of your inability to perceive or even withstand perceiving the whole. Okay, is there a problem with that?
Peterson uses the story of Moses to argue God is too mysterious and unknowable to be critiqued. This is a classic rhetorical shield, but it immediately collapses under scrutiny. You can't have it both ways. You can't claim God is completely unknowable and then turn around and make very specific claims about what this unknowable being wants, thinks, and commands. Religious texts don't just stop at God is mysterious. They go on to say this unknowable being wants you not to eat shellfish, or to stone adulterers, or to believe specific theological doctrines to avoid eternal damnation. That's awfully specific for something that's supposedly beyond human comprehension. If he's truly unknowable, then on what basis does anyone claim to know anything specific about him at all? And this argument that atheists only critique a simplistic God, that's a deflection. We're critiquing the God that billions of people actually worship, the one who supposedly answers prayers, performs miracles, inspires holy books, and has very strong opinions about human sexuality. That's not some straw man we invented. That's what churches preach every Sunday. Ultimately, if you want to retreat to a God that is just the unknowable basis of reality, fine. But then you're no longer defending Christianity. You're arguing for a vague deism. And you certainly can't use that unknowable mystery to justify a single specific moral claim or religious doctrine.
Do you think that there's an underlying unity of things?
Could you explain that question?
Well, scientists, for example, believe that science unifies in a comprehensive theory. Do you? Yes? No? Or that there are multiple competing truths? Those are the options.
This question is a classic rhetorical trap, designed to conflate the scientific method with a religious belief in unity. Yes, science seeks unified theories, but it earns its unifications through evidence. We know electricity and magnetism are linked because we ran the experiments. We know life shares a common ancestor because we have the DNA. This isn't faith, it's the result of brutal, rigorous testing. Peterson wants to slide from science seeks elegant explanations to therefore you believe in an underlying metaphysical unity to that's basically God, checkmate atheists. Using Occam's razor to prefer a simpler theory is not a prayer, it's a practical tool. It's about finding the most efficient explanation, not discovering some sacred order. And here's the most crucial difference. Science is totally open to the possibility that there might not be a final unified theory. Maybe reality is just messy and complicated with different rules at different scales. We follow the evidence, not predetermined conclusions about cosmic unity. A belief system that starts with the answer that there must be an underlying unity isn't science. That's dogma.
What is it that you think guides you when you're talking to me to help you determine whether what you say is true? How do you distinguish that from being governed by something that's false? I'm getting at the fact that your conscience guides you. Is that reasonable? So Elijah, the prophet Elijah, defined God in the Old Testament as the voice of conscience within.
If conscience is the voice of God, then God is a cultural chameleon. Raise a child in a society that normalizes theft, and their conscience will tell them to steal. Raise one in a society that celebrates conquest, and their divine voice will tell them to kill. The voice of God seems to sing a very different tune depending on your zip code and your century. This is another rhetorical shell game. Defining God as conscience to prove he exists is like defining God as love or pizza. Yes, the thing exists, but slapping the label God on a common human experience doesn't make it divine. It just makes the word God meaningless. And let's be honest about the track record of this so-called divine conscience. For centuries, the conscience of good, God-fearing people told them that slavery was moral, that heretics should be burned, and that apostates should be killed. If conscience is God, then God is wildly inconsistent, culturally conditioned, and often monstrously wrong. So what guides me? Evidence, reason, and a conscience shaped by evolution and a modern understanding of human well-being. We can study this entire process in the brain. We don't need to invoke the supernatural. Calling this complex natural process God doesn't elevate the conversation, it deliberately confuses it.
Morality and purpose cannot be found within science.
This argument fundamentally misunderstands what science is and does. It's like saying you can't find recipes in a telescope. Yeah, no kidding, that's not what telescopes are for. You cannot put morality in a test tube. You can't run an experiment that proves from first principles that compassion is good or that cruelty is bad. Science is a method for understanding how the world works, not a prescriptive system for how we should live. My moral framework isn't derived from science, but it is built upon the foundation of reality that science reveals. Science, psychology, sociology, and neuroscience. These fields give us the best and most up-to-date understanding of the human condition. If you want to build a society that is just, fair, and prosperous, you need an evidence-based understanding of economics, human behavior, and tribalism. But here's what Peterson and others miss. Just because science does not dictate morality, does not mean we need to invoke the supernatural to have ethics and meaning. And as for purpose, the idea that purpose must be assigned to us by some cosmic authority is incredibly bleak. It makes us puppets. The absence of a preordained purpose doesn't lead to despair. It empowers me to create my own meaning, which is far more inspiring than being told what my purpose is.
Explaining the evolution of morality and explaining morality itself aren't the same thing.
That sounds deep until you actually think about it for 2 seconds. It's like saying, explaining how eyes evolved doesn't explain vision itself, except how can you possibly claim to understand vision if you ignore how the eye evolved and works? Peterson's trying to create this artificial distinction between understanding where morality comes from and understanding what morality is. When we understand that morality evolved as a social coordination mechanism, that actually tells us a ton about morality itself. It explains why we have the moral intuitions we do, why we care about fairness, why we feel guilt, why we're outraged by cheaters and free riders. It explains why different cultures have different moral codes but similar underlying themes. It explains why our moral circle has expanded over time from family to tribe to nation to species. It's like saying, explaining why we evolved taste buds doesn't explain flavor. Actually, it explains why sugar tastes good and poison tastes bad, which is pretty damn useful information. Same with morality. Understanding its evolutionary basis helps us recognize our biases, expand our moral circle, and build better ethical systems.
I would say that the domain of religion is the domain of morality and purpose. Yes, exactly. And also that science is actually structured, at least in part technically, to eliminate such considerations from its purview a priori. Right? That's why we define science as value-free. But that has to be wrong because scientists have to prioritize their attention towards something before they can even engage in observation. And that act of prioritization of attention is a value-predicated act. And so I can continue. There's all sorts of things we have to assume about science before it can take place.
Peterson tries to smuggle religion into science by pointing out that scientists make choices. This is like saying, you chose what to have for breakfast, therefore breakfast is a religious act. It's an absurd leap. Of course, science is guided by values. We choose to study cancer over belly button lint because we, as humans, value health and life. We research sustainable energy because we value having a habitable planet. The key distinction Peterson deliberately blurs is between the process of science and the practice of science. The scientific method itself, observation, hypothesis, testing, peer review, is value neutral in the sense that it works the same way whether you're studying cancer or comic books. The value of wanting to cure cancer doesn't change the biology of a cancer cell. Water boils at 100 degrees regardless of your moral commitments. The scientific method, observation, testing, and ruthless peer review, is designed to filter out personal wishes and biases, leaving only what can be demonstrated. And this gets to the heart of his game. He says, see, science requires values, hoping you'll leap to the conclusion, therefore science requires religion. But the desire to ease suffering and seek truth is not a religious invention, it's a core humanistic one. Why should we outsource our ethics to ancient texts riddled with slavery and misogyny when secular human values are pushing us to build a better world right now?
All human societies were slave-owning, so you can't blame that on the Bible.
Oh, this is rich. Everyone was doing it, so you can't blame us. That's the moral reasoning of a middle schooler caught cheating on a test. Peterson's real argument is that we can't blame the Bible for endorsing slavery because slavery was common. But isn't a book from an all-good, all-knowing God supposed to be a beacon of moral clarity, not just a reflection of its barbaric time? Imagine if the Bible had said, "Thou shalt not own another human being." That would have been revolutionary. That would have looked like divine insight. Instead, it gives instructions. The Bible finds time to prohibit shellfish and mixed fabrics, but owning people, that gets a rule book. You may buy slaves from the nations around you. Slaves, obey your earthly masters. This isn't cultural contamination, it's a divine endorsement. To excuse this is like defending ancient medical texts for recommending bloodletting because it was common practice. Sure, that explains it, but it doesn't make it good medicine, and it doesn't make a book that regulates a profound moral evil a perfect guide for humanity. In fact, the Bible didn't just excuse slavery, it sanctified it. As the escaped slave Frederick Douglass wrote, its pro-slavery verses were the strongest support of slavery in America, stronger than any economic or political argument.
We're talking about slavery. So many people bolstered it based on the
Everyone
Bible.
ex-
Based on the
that's-
Bible. They
that's
looked at
much
it and
less
they
true.
justified it in the United States and the Deep South. They justified slavery
Yeah, but
based on the Bible.
the main thrust of Protestant thought in particular was stringently
Yes,
against slavery,
which-
and it was about the only movement in the history
Yes.
of the human race that
Yes.
had an anti-slavery
Which-
direction.
Peterson's doing that thing where he gives Christianity credit for eventually opposing something it supported for over 1,000 years. That's like giving someone credit for putting out a fire they started. Let's get honest about the history here. For centuries, Christians used the Bible to explicitly justify slavery. We're talking about detailed theological arguments. They quoted Ephesians telling slaves to obey their masters. They used the curse of Ham to justify enslaving Africans. They pointed out that Jesus never condemned slavery despite having plenty of opportunities. While it's true that many abolitionists were motivated by their Christian beliefs, so were many defenders of slavery. That's the complication. You can't just pick and choose the good parts of history that align with your argument without acknowledging the other side. The fact is that both the pro-slavery and anti-slavery camps use the same Bible to support their very different positions about the only anti-slavery movement in history. That's a stretch. While Protestant-driven abolitionism was powerful, especially in the 18th and 19th centuries, it wasn't the sole force against slavery globally or historically. Secular Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire and Rousseau also criticized slavery on rational and humanistic grounds, influencing anti-slavery laws in places like France. And let's not forget earlier examples. Slavery was debated and sometimes opposed in ancient societies like Rome or among certain Islamic scholars, though not always successfully. Peterson's claim feels like it overemphasizes the Christian narrative while downplaying other influences. So while Peterson wants to credit Christianity for being a moral leader, the truth is that the abolitionists were rebels, arguing against the plain text of their own holy book and 1800 years of tradition. That's not moral leadership. That's playing catch-up on a fire you started and then claiming you were leading the parade all along.
So if you believe something, you stake your life on it.
What do you mean by that?
You live for it, and you die for it. That's what I mean by that. It isn't something that you say. It isn't something that's associated with logical consistency. It's not declarative. It's not propositional. It's not a figment of your imagination. It's the presupposition of your attention and your action. And you're either fragmented, in which case you worship multiple gods, or there's some unity at the bottom of it that makes you an unstoppable force.
I can value multiple things, my family, my work, truth, compassion, without needing some mystical unifying force underneath it all. My values can work together without requiring a cosmic CEO to organize them. But I can see how someone might be fragmented if their core values are in constant conflict, pulling them in different directions. I might describe that as a lack of a coherent worldview or a consistent ethical framework. And the unity at the bottom of it, absolutely. An atheist can strive for and achieve a profound sense of unity in their worldview. But this argument misses the mark by assuming that these core beliefs must be rooted in something transcendent or divine to give them meaning or direction.
Can there ever be a circumstance logically that lying could save someone?
Yeah, and if you're steeped in sin, you're likely to live in circumstances like that.
I'll give you an example. If you're in Nazi Germany, and it is the case that there's Jewish people in your attic and you're trying to
know
protect
the
them,
example.
would you lie to the Nazis? if
I
they're
would have
asking?
done everything I bloody well could, so I wouldn't be in that situation
you
to
lie?
begin with. It's a hypothetical, and it's
You
not
can't answer
answerable.
hypotheticals?
No, I can't answer a hypothetical like that because
Did
it's
you eat
far.
today?
Look,
Did you
don't
eat today?
play games.
I'm not playing a game. I'm just
Yes,
asking if you
you
ate
are.
it today.
If you present me with an intractable moral choice that's stripped of context and you back me into a corner, you're playing game. I just told you
Hypothetical.
I would do everything that I could to make sure that I'm never in that situation. By the time you've got there, you've made so many mistakes that there's nothing you can do that isn't a sin.
Jordan Peterson's refusal to answer the classic Nazi at the door hypothetical isn't a sign of deep thinking. It's the sound of a moral framework collapsing under the weight of reality. He dismisses it as a game, a trick, and says the real moral action is to have avoided the situation in the first place. That's not a moral answer, It's a desperate dodge. It's like responding to the trolley problem by saying, "You should have designed better brakes." It's useless advice that blames the person in the dilemma for systemic horrors they didn't create. So why can't he just give a straight answer? Because his entire worldview depends on morality being a set of absolute, unchanging, divine commands. He cannot admit that lying to save a life is the obviously moral choice, because that would mean morality is situational. It would mean human well-being and consequences matter more than rigid ancient rules. His system is too brittle to handle that fact. He calls the choice intractable and stripped of context. That's absurd. The context is Nazi Germany. The context is the Holocaust. The context is the systematic murder of millions. That context doesn't make the choice harder. For a humanist, it makes it incredibly simple. You lie. You lie to the Nazi because saving innocent lives is infinitely more important than being technically honest with a murderer. See how easy that was? No theological gymnastics, no intellectual cowardice. If your moral system makes that simple choice intractable, then your moral system is broken. It has failed the most basic test of humanity.
This is just the first half of the reaction to the Jubilee video. If you want to see the final part, let me know in the comments, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on the final part.